Welcome, everyone. I'm Julia Mendez. I am the Principal Business Consultant with Affirmity Workforce Analytics, and I'm here to talk to you a little bit about some latest OFCCP developments. So just the other day, on January 16th, I had the pleasure of communicating and listening in on a speech that now who was the acting director and now director of the OFCCP, Craig Leen, was invited to speak at this particular event. So on January 16th, this was the DC Metro Business Leadership Network, and some of you might be familiar with that. That's one of the chapters of what used to be called the U.S. Business Leadership Network, and they're a nonprofit organization that helps companies to reach out to individuals who have disabilities in an effort to employ them. So they do some wonderful, wonderful work. What was interesting about this particular discussion is that Leen mentioned that the number one focus for 2019 with respect to compliance reviews that the OFCCP conducts is going to be on disability inclusion as well as compliance with Section 503 of the Rehabilitation Act. So this is a wake-up call for federal contractors and subcontractors who have not been doing a whole lot in the area of actively recruiting for individuals with disabilities, as well as ensuring that the processes that they have in place, whether it's recruiting, hiring, onboarding, et cetera, are accessible for individuals with disabilities. In his conversation with the group, he mentioned that the labor participation rate for individuals with disabilities is anywhere from 20 to 28%. And, of course, that's something that he's hoping, as well as other agencies are hoping, changes in the near future. He also mentioned that the wage gap for individuals with disabilities is between 30 to 40%. And as you know, the OFCCP has been as well focused on compensation, particularly among genders, particularly with women. As we know, we've seen a lot of different settlements lately regarding women that are being paid much less than men doing similar or the same type of work. And we've seen the same thing also predominantly with minorities as when compared to non-minorities. So that is a focus area as well. He also mentioned that about 50% of accommodations are free, and that the average cost of accommodation for someone who has a disability is only $500. So if an organization states that they're not doing accommodations because it's too costly for them, more than likely that's not going to be a valid argument because, again, it's so, traditionally it's been so economical to be able to assist someone with an accommodation request, which oftentimes costs nothing. A lot of times people that have a physical disability, for example, already have the equipment or the things that they need to be able to perform their job. So it's just a matter of letting them bring those accommodations to work, if you will. So I wanted to mention, too, this is particularly a topic that Leen is interested in because he shares very publicly that he has two children that are young, they're in their teens, who have autism. And so he's talked about personal stories of how difficult it has been for his children to have accommodations, whether it's at school or places that they go, but also the barriers that exist because of people's thinking when it comes to individuals with disabilities, about the stereotypes that they have and lots of times the stigma when it comes to cognitive disabilities in particular. So what are we to expect? Well, he mentioned that 500 focus reviews, about that many at the corporate headquarters and possibly at regional levels, is expected to take place this year. And he did mention that these audits will be comprehensive and they will involve an on-site visit. As you well are aware, a lot of the things that come with compliance with Section 503 of the Rehabilitation Act would require the OFCCP to come on site to be able to check, for example, accessibility to the building. And once you're in the building, do you have accessibility for things, for example, the restroom, water fountains, being able to even get to your desk? So those are things that they will be doing. Compliance officers will meet with the following types of employees if you're selected for this type of focus review. So they're going to want to interview the ADA coordinator or whoever's in charge at your organization with overseeing accommodation requests, HR leadership, as well as talking to individuals in the workplace that have disabilities if they agree to be interviewed. So that's going to be voluntary. So they want to get a sense from these individuals how they feel like they're being treated at that organization. The OFCCP compliance officer, if you're selected for this type of review, they are going to bring a list of best practices that the OFCCP has put together. And that's going to be, a lot of these things are required by law that an organization puts into place, but some of these are not a requirement, but they're just good practices to have. And so I'm going to share some of those with you that he mentioned during this discussion. So let's look at some of these best practices, and some of you might already be doing these types of things. And if so, if you've got some great stories of things that you're doing proactively to build an inclusive environment for individuals with disabilities, I'd love to hear about it. Feel free to send me a message so that I can know about that and possibly highlight that as a best practice in the future during one of our webinars or blogs. So one thing that Director Leen talked about is having a centralized accommodation system. And so some of you might not have a way of tracking what accommodation requests are coming through, tracking where you are in that process, tracking who took care of the request, and how it was handled in the final outcome. And so if you don't have any systems in place, just be aware that many of you already utilize our Complete Resource Center or the CRC. So you might use that to upload documents or to keep track of your affirmative action program statistical analysis. Be aware that we also have an accommodation feature as well that you can track these requests, so as you see here on your right. But if you are not using that, maybe you're already using something different, just make sure that you're keeping the dates tracked of when the request was made, when it was completed, how it was handled, who handled the request, the type of accommodation that was requested, what was the outcome of that request, and even some receipts or the cost of that request. I've seen the OFCCP ask to see these receipts as evidence that you did indeed buy equipment, for example, when requested as an accommodation request. This is another example of what it could look like if you're using the CRC to keep track of these accommodation requests. Again, one is showing that someone's requesting a sign language interpreter for an interview. So keep in mind this is not just accommodation requests made by existing employees, but also made by applicants. So you want to make sure you're tracking that. Again, the date that the request was made, who made the request, who handled the request, was it approved. And the nice thing about the CRC is that it lets you also pinpoint to what plan that accommodation request is tied to. So maybe you've got locations spread out throughout the United States and you don't have an easy way of pinpointing to which plan, affirmative action plan, that is tied to. Keep in mind if you're audited for a particular location by the OFCCP, they're going to ask for plan-specific accommodations, and that is part of what they're regularly asking right now if you get selected for a review. So just keep in mind, however you're keeping track of that, it's best to keep it in a centralized place where you can have easy access to it in the event that you've got someone from the government, such as the OFCCP, requesting this information. Another point that Craig Leen mentioned that is a best practice is having leadership support, and I couldn't agree more with him. So some of the things that he talked about that make sense as far as leadership support is having a message coming from the top of the organization. So having the CEO or senior management relay this message that the organization supports people of all capabilities. And so here's an example from Prudential, which I really like. It's this commitment to diversity that they have on their website. So it's open for everyone to view it that goes to their website. But what I like about it, it's not just the CEO signing off on this. As you can see, there's a lot more signatures on there other than the CEO. And there's more signatures that I couldn't capture in the screenshot to fit in this page. So that is very impressive. So that's one of the things that he talked about. Or having a video of the CEO inviting people with disabilities to please come and apply for positions. That is an inclusive environment. Of course, if you have a video, just make sure that you have closed captioning so that people who have a hearing impairment, for example, are able to understand what's being said in the video. Also, correspondence expressing that the organization welcomes people with disabilities. So, like, for example, what I see here with Prudential on their website, but it could also be something on the intranet for existing employees or something posted on bulletin boards, or even something in an ad that you have posted to recruit individuals with disabilities that would, again, give the impression that your organization is welcoming people of all abilities. Also, having a statement that the organization wants to help them by providing accommodations if needed is important too, and that could be done when you're calling someone even in for a phone interview. Are you asking them if they need an accommodation if you are calling them in for a follow-up interview to come on-site, for example? Are you asking all applicants that you're getting ready to call on-site for an interview or to take a test if they need some type of accommodation? So that's an example of some things that your organization could do. He also talked about coordination with state and local agencies, and keep in mind that a lot of these services are cost absolutely nothing to an organization or to the individual with a disability that asks for some assistance. So vocational rehabilitation centers are located in all the states, and they can provide an employee with an individualized plan, and they can work with the employer in helping any employees that have some type of disability that need an accommodation to do their job effectively. So here I've got some information here, places that you can look up by going through the internet. America's Job Center will give you a listing of vocational rehabilitation offices throughout the U.S. And also be aware of the Ticket to Work program, the TTW, that also helps people who receive Social Security due to some type of disability, but they're looking for work. So they can still keep their benefits, their health coverage, and find a job. So that's something that you might want to take a look at. Also, veterans with a disability, keep in mind that many veterans not only would be covered under a veteran, protected veteran, as part of your affirmative action program, but we know that many veterans also have some type of disability, whether it's post-traumatic stress disorder or loss of a limb while they were on duty, or other related type of disabilities, or maybe it's not related to when they served. And so you can certainly reach out to Veterans Reemployment for some help in getting some of them to also be an applicant for your organization if they meet the qualifications. And then also independent living centers can also be of assistance to you possibly. And so check some of these things out. Make sure you're keeping track of this type of activity that you do with these different organizations as part of your outreach and recruitment efforts. Another thing that Craig Leen mentioned is accessibility of online recruiting tools. So I can't stress enough that you are required to have prominently displayed on your website a message such as what we see here with Prudential, where you're letting applicants know if they need a reasonable accommodation to be able to apply for a position, that they can either call a phone number or email the organization to ask for assistance. So that, again, needs to be prominently displayed. Oftentimes when I conduct mock audits of organizations, that's one of the services that we provide, I do check the website for compliance with practices enforced by the OFCCP. And this is one that I see oftentimes, that message is not prominently displayed, or when I contact the organization requesting accommodation, the person that is answering those phone calls or answering emails is not properly trained to accept an accommodation. So that's important as well. In case you're not aware, there are sites also that offer free accessibility screening. So one issue is that sometimes people with disabilities that try to apply online are not able to because they're using assisted devices that are not accessible or not speaking well with how you have your website programmed. And so one common issue that people that are using screen readers face is that the website is not accessible. And so maybe you have some graphics, but you have no alternate text to go with the graphics. So when they go to utilize the screen reader, nothing comes up to explain what those graphics are. So here are just a sampling of 3 websites that you can go to and plug in your company's website address, and it will let you know whether or not it has any accessibility issues. So these are free of charge. Self-identification is something else that Craig Leen talked about, and as you probably already know, you're required to give applicants the opportunity to voluntarily self-identify post-offer. You are also required to give them an opportunity to self-identify. Once you become a covered contractor, you have to survey your entire workforce to see if you've got individuals already employed that have disabilities. And then every 5 years, you have to resurvey the workforce again. And then in the years in between those 5 years, you have to, again, remind your employees that they have the ability at any point to self-disclose that they have a disability. Keep in mind, too, that you have to use the form that the OFCCP has supplied through their website. You cannot go ahead and turn that into an electronic form and change words, add or delete or modify in any way, because then it won't be compliant. So that's important, too. And that's one of the things that I also check when I'm doing mock audits. So these are just some examples of things that you can do to encourage self-identification, because what I often hear from organizations is that employees don't want to self-identify. They have a very low self-identification rate, or applicants don't want to. So here are some things that you might consider doing if you're not already. Again, including disability, the term disability in your company's diversity statement, including an invitation to individuals with disabilities to apply as part of your standard equal employment opportunity statement in all your recruitment materials. And when you show pictures of people in recruitment materials or on your website or in print, make sure you've got diversity of people and diversity of abilities demonstrated through those pictures. Indicating through recruitment materials your willingness to provide accommodations during the hiring and interviewing process. Advertising the existence of employee resource or affinity groups if you have them, especially if you have some targeted to individuals with disability or those interested in supporting that. And ensuring that people that you have on your staff that do hiring are aware of the guidelines and accessibility. So these are just some of the things that you can do to increase the chance or the probability of someone self-identifying. When it comes to employees, inviting employees to disclose their disability through voluntary surveys, and when you're collecting that information, be clear about the purpose of the survey. So one thing that Craig Leen did mention is that he doesn't want you to simply send out an email to your employees with the document to fill out to self-identify. There should be some messaging going around that, encouraging them to fill it out and explain to them why you're asking for them to fill it out. And again, also an inclusive message coming from someone in a senior level within the organization would definitely increase the likelihood that they will fill it out. So these are just some things that you can do, as well as disability type inclusion training can be effective too, so that people know how to interact with one another and to break down some of these stereotypes that they often face. So here's some examples. Corning, for example, on their website, they talk about their employee resource group, the Abled and Disabled Partnering Together resource group. EY, which was Ernst & Young, does a fabulous job talking about the different programs that they have. And what's unique to them is I don't often see programs dedicated to individuals with mental disabilities, and that's something that they do very well, so you might want to check out their website. Here's another example. I'm showing Microsoft because Director Leen specifically called out Microsoft as doing some wonderful work in this area. I've heard him speak about them on various occasions, and I also have personal experience from talking to Microsoft about this program about autism. So they have an autism program and other programs geared at hiring people with disabilities. And the autism program they've mentioned is very effective, especially in placing engineers. Just a couple of reminders, data collection analysis. You are required under the regulations to track the number of applicants who are applying for all your job openings, and of those, how many are self-identifying as having a disability. And then you also have to track total hires by job opening, as well as of those, how many have a disability. So that is part of the regulations, and you are required to submit that in the event of an audit. And then one other thing that often gets overlooked is that the OFCCP requires you to also check the effectiveness of your outreach and recruitment strategies. So here's an example of how you could do that. You could do it in a spreadsheet. Again, you can track this information using the CRC, but somewhere track by source, recruiting source or job fair, if you went to some job fairs, the total number of applicants that came from that source and how many of those were hired, and of those, how many had disabilities. And so that gives you a sense, it gives the OFCCP a sense of how effective those strategies are for your organization. Again, the CRC, I'm just showing you an example of how that can look. So the CRC allows you to track all your different outreach and recruitment efforts. You can track it by category. So these that you see here are examples of things that the organization did with respect to people with disabilities, but you could also track it by veteran source, minority source, women, et cetera. And the nice thing is that you could put reminders in here to follow up with some of these sources. It also lets you export these into a report format so that you can submit it in the event of an audit or for your own purposes if you'd like to see it in a report form. And then lastly, I want to mention that one of the things that the OFCCP also often asks is about training. What training have you done, especially for those in your organization involved in recruitment, screening, selection, promotion, disciplinary-related processes? That is in the regulations. And so I cite the regulations here on the right. You're required to do that for protected veterans regulations and individuals with disabilities. So if you're currently not doing that training, be aware it's a requirement. And if you don't feel comfortable doing that type of training, be aware that Affirmity does have resources, including myself, that do engage in that type of training, whether it's live in front of a group or via web or recorded. So again, some things that, in closing, that Leen talked about, what you should expect. Leen and regional district directors will be discussing Section 503 in every speech that they give this year. This is what he said during this conversation. He did discuss prejudice regarding psychiatric disabilities, and definitely will include talks about this when referring to cognitive disabilities. He also wants a culture fit and not be so tied to statistics, and more about the aspects of what the organization is trying to do to identify the problem. So again, their focus is not going to be just on you completing the metrics. They want to know that you're doing something to change the environment, to change the environment in your organization to be more inclusive and to have more opportunities for people to move upwards no matter what their abilities. He also mentioned that they're going to be focusing some effort on looking on parental leave, whether it's men or women. He talked about that. And also to expect that by the end of this year, there's also going to be a focus for veterans. So focus reviews will start by the end of this year on veterans and whether or not you are compliant with VEVRA, the Vietnam Era Veterans Readjustment Assistance Act. So if you're not doing anything right now to be proactive in reaching out to your veterans, now is definitely the time to start looking at that. And if you need assistance with that, we can certainly help you. So in summary, what you want to do, proactively reach out to recruiting sources that can assist you in attracting qualified individuals with disabilities. Regularly monitor the effectiveness of recruitment and hiring of individuals with disabilities. Train management on disability etiquette and laws regarding questions to ask in an interview, as well as handling accommodations. Review your website. Make sure that you've got the accommodation statement prominently displayed. It's easy to find. And consider running an accessibility test of your website. So I gave you some applications that you can do that for free. And don't forget, track your outreach and recruitment efforts, as well as any training that you all go through, mentoring, and other programs targeted to individuals with disabilities. Keep in mind that record keeping is the #1 violation found in compliance reviews. And then lastly, I just want to let you know that we do offer a lot of training programs. A lot of these are via web, and all of these can be customized to your organization's needs. But keep in mind, customer corners are free to all of our clients. The next one's going to be in February, where we're going to be talking about all types of how to prepare for an audit, and we're going to cover some things with respect to training requirements for federal contractors. And then principles of recruiter compliance is something that we do, and I do talk about what to do specifically for individuals with disabilities to keep that compliant process compliant. And then I want to remind you that quarterly we have Principles of Affirmative Action, 2 days, 12 hours of training that's conducted out of the Irving, Dallas, Texas office, and that is available to our clients. And then we also have webinars regularly on engaging in effective outreach and recruiting. And lastly, we do offer compliance with BABRA and Section 503 of the Rehab Act, which is a requirement for people that basically are in decision-making roles that they go through. And all these programs are SHRM and HRCI certified, which makes it nice, too, if you're trying to collect hours for recertification. Well, thank you for listening in. And if you've got any suggestions or questions, feel free to forward those to me.